guys, welcome to another episode of U.S. History with Lennox, and today we're going to look at one specific event during the presidency of Richard Nixon. Now, Richard Nixon has been in the national political scene for some time. We were first introduced to him in the 1940s when, as a congressman from California, he will serve on the House of Un-American Activities Committee in the height of McCarthyism. From there, he will become a U.S. Senator, and then he will be tapped to be Vice President of the United States under Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, Nixon is going to get his own opportunity at the presidency in 1968 when he is elected. Once he takes office in 69, he will successfully open the door once again between the United States and China, a door that had been closed since the start of the Cold War. He'll even negotiate the SALT talks with Russia, where we discuss this idea of détente, a cooling off period where both sides agreed to limit the amount of nuclear weapons that they were creating. It's under Nixon's presidency that America will finally leave Vietnam. But all of that aside, what Nixon is really remembered for more than anything else is a scandal. Probably one of the largest political scandals in American history. I'm talking about the Watergate Scandal. Now, what's fascinating about Watergate is, in retrospect, it probably didn't even have to happen. In fact, if Nixon had had just a little bit more of self-confidence, he probably would have gone down as a very successful president in American history. And I'll show you why here. First of all, let's look at the election map of 1972. Look at this. Nixon wasn't even challenged for the presidency, yet he still felt the need to cheat. And that's what leads to this Watergate scandal. So let's dive in a little deeper and try to figure out exactly what was on Nixon's mind when this whole thing started. To understand, we first have to go back to Nixon's first term, when the Pentagon Papers were released. The Pentagon Papers were a series of documents released by Daniel Ellsberg, a former Defense Department employee. And what they did was document the deception and misleading of the American public that the government practiced in with regards to the Vietnam War. They were telling us something completely different than what was actually going on. Now, Nixon took the Pentagon Papers as a personal attack and an attempt to undermine his presidency. Never mind that these papers dated all the way back to the Kennedy administration. So, Watergate is going to grow out of the release of the Pentagon Papers. And as I stated earlier, it will be one of the largest political scandals, if not the largest, in American history. Well, where does the term Watergate come from? That's just the name of the building where the Democratic National Headquarters were located. And what's going to happen is Republicans are going to be caught spying on those headquarters. But we'll get to that in just a minute. The scandal grew when Nixon lied about his involvement and then tried to cover it up. That's a lesson for all of us. If we ever get caught, just admit it. Don't try to lie and then cover it up, because then it always gets worse. When the New York Times and the Washington Post started to publish the Pentagon Papers, the Nixon administration tried to stop that publication by suing them. They'll actually take them to court. When that proves unsuccessful, the White House is going to create a specific unit to protect internal security in the executive branch. This unit was called the Plumbers, and their sole job was to stop up any leaks that were coming up out of the White House. No information will ever be, quote, leaked out of the White House again if the Plumbers have anything to say about it. Now, let's face it, Richard Nixon was kind of paranoid. He believed that the Pentagon Papers were released to discredit his presidency. He believed that his enemies were conspiring to undermine everything he was trying to do. And this paranoia is the fertilizer, if you will, that led the roots of Watergate to grow. What's fascinating about American politics is a lot of decisions are typically made based on the polls. The polls tell politicians where they stand in the minds of the American people. Well, the polls in 1972 told Nixon that he just had a slight edge in this presidential campaign. When that news comes to light, the role of the plumbers shift, and they shift from fixing leaks in the White House to practicing political espionage. It was all discovered on June 17, 1972, when 5 men were arrested trying to break into the Democratic National Headquarters inside the Watergate building. Finding this story fascinating, 2 journalists at the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, are going to start investigating this break-in more in depth. And they're going to be the ones who open up this story to the public. As their story grows and they discover more and more connections between the break-in and the plumbers and the president, Congress starts to get involved. They'll start having hearings to investigate whether or not this scandal is actually tied to the president. They will find out in their investigation that the Attorney General under Nixon, John Mitchell, actually controlled the funds that paid for that espionage, that paid for that break-in of the Watergate building. In June of 1973, John Dean, who was the legal counsel to the White House, will testify that Nixon knew from the very first day about the plan to break into the Democratic National Headquarters. He was in on it all along. To try to turn the tables on Dean's testimony, the White House is going to announce that Nixon had secretly been recording all conversations in the White House, and these tapes would exonerate him. Well, of course, the tapes become the center of the investigation now. Wouldn't you think that would happen? So obviously, the Congress is going to want the tapes, to which Nixon says no. They're going to sue to get the tapes. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is going to force Nixon to turn over the tapes, to which Nixon said no. I have executive privilege, and that privilege, as President of the United States, protects me from having to release these tapes, which could have some national security implications. But there were still answers to be found, and so a compromise would be reached. The compromise was that the administration would allow the chairman of the Senate Watergate Committee to listen to the tapes, and then they would provide a transcript to the committee and the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox. The deal is going to break down. The special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, is going to say, no, transcripts are not enough. I need to hear the tapes. Because Cox is an employee of the Judicial Department, Nixon will order the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, to fire Cox. Doesn't want the transcripts? Fine, you're going to lose your job. Work with me or you'll be against me. That's how Nixon saw it. It's known as the Saturday Night Massacre. When Nixon fires Cox, the Attorney General of the United States is actually going to resign in protest. Not only that, we're going to see the House of Representatives go ahead and start impeachment proceedings. Now, eventually, Nixon is going to turn over the tapes on October 23rd of 1973. He will give the recordings to the special prosecutor, Judge Sirica. Now, while a lot of the conversations on the tapes absolutely indicated that Nixon had knowledge of the break-in and the cover-up, there was one interesting tape that had 18 and a half minutes erased off of that. Made us question what was really going on. What more didn't we know? But we had heard enough. On July 27, 1974, the House Judiciary Committee will approve articles of impeachment against the president, and the House was set to vote on the matter. If that wasn't enough, on August 5th of that same year, when the smoking gun tape, that 18 minutes, became public, Nixon was told, you're not going to survive a vote in the Senate. So he is going to end up resigning 4 days later. On August 9th, 1974, Richard Nixon will become the first and only president to resign in the midst of his term. He will be replaced by Vice President Gerald Ford. What's interesting is Ford came into office through some scandal as well. The former Vice President, Spiro Agnew, actually had to resign in 1973 because it was proven that he had taken bribes himself. So Ford stepped in. Now he's President of the United States. He will become the 37th president, and we will see in the aftermath of Watergate nearly 30 officials go to prison due to their role in the Watergate scandal. In September of 74, Ford will give a full pardon to Richard Nixon, but all of this is just going to add to the public distrust of government. Just take that credibility gap that we started to see grow in the 1960s and watch it get even wider, and it still exists today. So there you have it, the Watergate scandal. Now I'm sure you're wondering, what happened to those 18 and a half minutes that just disappeared from the recordings? We're never going to know for sure. A few things we do know. Rosemary Woods was the secretary to the president, and during this time, she admitted to accidentally recording over about 5 minutes of the tape when she inadvertently hit the record button on her desk. Some people, such as former White House Chief of Staff Alexander Haig, believe that Nixon erased those tapes himself. But regardless, we do know during those 18 and a half minutes, Nixon was absolutely talking about the break-in at the Watergate. So he absolutely had knowledge of it. But again, was this even necessary? We'll never know. That's going to do it, guys. Thanks for watching. If you missed anything, you can always rewind and watch again. If you liked it or learned something, give me a like. I always love new subscribers, but other than that, we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.